problem, just send that, he said, I heard some more state action. She said it must have been. No, I never did. I read his speech for it, but never did.
Shit.
Cindy, how are you? Good. Hey, Roger.
Yes,
I got a funny story I want to share, and some of you may have already seen it, heard it, but it's Bible related. Who owns the oldest computer? Who owns the oldest computer? Adam and Eve. And it was an Apple with very limited memory. One byte.
yes, well done, well done, well done, all right.
Makes sense.
Did you all hear that joke?
I did. It was wonderful.
Wasn't that good?
Yeah,
It was.
can you spell that without an R? Yeah, without, yeah. Can you spell that without an R?
THAT.
THAT.
Oh, yeah, you're good, you're good. All right, yes,
Steve Atkins at the revival.
no,
His sister stood up and gave a testimony.
that lady sitting over on the left side, yeah,
and he was sitting beside her.
well, I don't know.
He passed away as
Oh,
Sunday. I haven't heard any particulars, don't know what.
so what was he to Sammy?
No relation.
Okay, got it.
I bet he has massive heart attack,
Mm,
massive heart attacks.
right,
When
All right.
Atkins was nothing, anybody can. Did.
well,
Bob and Pat Thomas?
don't know.
Very, very.
We call it.
I need to slide this over.
But he was up when he, we talked to him, just talked to him, you know.
I moved you, didn't get sick, did you? All right. Hey, Carolyn, how are you? Mitzi?
She is broadcasting.
Yeah, so I'll come out and say hi. All right. Well, okay, let's go ahead and get started. We were a little off on the time this week. Last week, we were on it. Well, it was Sunday, wasn't it? Well, let me ask you this, before we pray. Let's look at these questions real quick. Has there ever been a time in your life when you realized that the Lord was speaking to you about a small sin that had the potential to get really dangerous? And the next one would be, what did God show you about that sin? Yeah. I'll say yeah. I think, I want to say of course, but you can't say of course, you can just say yes, because no, I don't think everybody would have to say that would be true.
Read that again.
Has there ever been a time in your life when you realized that the Lord was speaking to you about a small sin that had the potential to get really dangerous, become something more greater?
Well, not for me, but when Gary said he wanted to divorce me, and I said, there's another woman, and he said, no.
Well, we're only going to talk about ourselves, but we're only going to talk about ourselves, okay?
I mean, it's gonna say, yeah. I knew.
The small sin would be I'd get the butcher knife.
Well,
They could get to something bigger, right?
probably did that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, actually, yeah. But I know there was probably other things though for yourself though, that you had to deal with later on to keep it from blowing up and getting to a place of hatefulness and meanness and stuff like that to keep from going those directions, I'm sure. What what did God show you about that sin? For me, it's always about, and it's one of the 5 things that I was reading here, I'll share with you a little bit. It's always like, what are the consequences of it? Like, what could it lead to? That there's nothing, that things like, that you got to consider the consequences, I think. And I think that's an issue that you learn better maybe as you grow older. When you're younger, you're more impulsive, you don't think about it as much. But as you get older, then you think about consequences. You can see there's more at stake than just whether it's something it would lead to pleasure in your life, or you think would lead to pleasure in your life, or something that would lead to gain in your life. Can be ethical type stuff. We let, we think of things like cheating on taxes and stuff like that. People taking money from a small amount of money from a till at a register, during the day. You get, one time I took out $5 out of the register or something. And the next time, well, maybe I feel like, well, I didn't get caught that, maybe I'll take out $10 this time. Those are things that lead to little things. So think about people who get caught in embezzlement and stuff like that. Yeah, little sins. So hello, you all. Well, doing okay? Don't be late. Don't apologize. I didn't get here just a few minutes.
I've never gone back to New York from
Oh,
Georgia.
was it a good visit?
And we
Right.
we've had a late dinner and lunch.
Was it a good visit?
Yes.
That's awesome.
So then I-
Okay, all right. So, well, these are the kinds of things we're going to consider tonight as we think about the seventh commandment. And so let's pause and reflect for a moment in prayer. God, you see all things. You see the good, the bad. Be with us tonight as we consider how we can be more clearly the image of your Son, who teaches us that the mind is a powerful thing, and that the mind, if not controlled or geared in the right direction, can certainly lead us in the wrong path. Help us tonight to study well and learn. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. All right, so there we go. Let's watch our video here. That's not touchscreen, ding dong. Do I have the volume on?
Yes, I've got it.
Got it.
Today we come to the seventh commandment, and as we do that, we're going to be exploring the commandment to not commit adultery. The fact that this has to be one of the top 10 commandments tells us that in the ancient world, this was a serious issue, just like it is today. So we often think that we live in this hyper-sexualized era, and we do. But this was a struggle for the people in the ancient Egyptian times. It was a struggle for the Israelites who were set free from slavery. This is a struggle, our human struggle with our sexual desires, our drives, and relationships that bring harm to other people. So we're going to explore that in this session today. But before we do that, I want to take you back to Egypt, and I want to take you back to just south of Luxor, actually just south of the Valley of the Kings, is a temple. It's on the back side of that. It's a temple that is one of the wonders of ancient Egypt. It's Hatshepsut's temple, her funerary temple. And Hatshepsut was one of the first, if not the first, female pharaohs. Now, typically the pharaohs were men. So what happened when she becomes pharaoh is she has to be transformed into a man. And so she goes into a room, the priests pray, there's a certain liturgy that happens, and when she comes out, while she still looks like a female, she has in essence become a male. There is something interesting that's happening in this story. And she builds this temple as a place to remember her in her death. And I want you to have a chance to see it. I don't want you to miss it. And I want to take you there now so you can see Hatshepsut's temple. I'm standing in front of Hatshepsut's temple, which is just the other side of the Valley of the Kings. And here we have the temple that was built by Hatshepsut. She was one of the few female rulers over Egypt. Born in 1507, she died in 1458. The next ruler, after the pharaoh had died, the next ruler was only 4 years old. And so she had ruled alongside her husband, and instead of turning the kingdom over to a 4-year-old, which was violating the rules, the priest decided to turn it over at her encouragement to Hatshepsut, which was also a violation of the rules. In order for her to continue to rule as Pharaoh, once the 4-year-old became 8, old enough to rule over Egypt, the requirement was that she build a temple to Hathor. And as she built the temple to Hathor, there was a regeneration room in the temple. She went in the regeneration room, and after spending the night there, when she emerged, it was said that she became a man. So she was still in the body of a woman, but she became a man. And she is now said to have permission to rule over the kingdom or the empire of Egypt. And so she becomes the Pharaoh of Egypt, one of the few female pharaohs. We're going to go inside and take a look, and then we'll talk a little more about how this connects with Moses. Depending on when we date Moses, she either is, some have said she was the princess who pulled Moses out of the river Nile, or she lived before his time if we give a late dating to Moses. But it's an interesting, what you see here was built somewhere around the time of Moses, before or during the time of Moses. I suggest probably way before the time of Moses, within 100 years of that. But let's go take a look. So here again at the Temple of Hatshepsut, you have a chance to see the mountains up above into which this temple was carved. And then below, what you find is the altar. And so there were steps on the one side. Animals would be offered as sacrifice on the altar. And this gives you a sense of what the Temple of Jerusalem was like, and the altar in which the priests would offer their sacrifices. It was, the ideas were used throughout the ancient Middle East or ancient Near East. And you have a chance to see what that looked like here as people would offer their sacrifices to the Egyptian gods. So while there are not lots of connections I want to draw from the Temple of Hatshepsut to the Ten Commandments, I wanted you to have a chance to see this. Since we are in Egypt, I thought you'd really need to see this. Many of you will never be here, and I thought you might enjoy having a chance to see this magnificent temple, one of the wonders, one of the treasures really of ancient Egypt. I find Hatshepsut's temple absolutely astounding. Now behind me, you see the sun setting on the west side of the Nile. You see the Nile River, and you see the mountain there. It's at the base of that mountain where Hatshepsut's temple is found. But you see here next to me the goddess Sekhmet. Sekhmet is portrayed as a lioness, and she is the daughter of Ra, and she is fierce. Like a lioness, she is fierce, and she brings the wrath of the gods upon those who have violated the moral commandments, like you shall not commit adultery. And so she brings plagues and other acts of judgment. But if you obey the laws, if you follow the commandments, you obey the moral laws in Egypt, then and you offer her sacrifices, she becomes the domesticated cat, the goddess Bastet. And there she is your companion, and she cares for you and protects you and watches over you. So I want us to think together as we ponder her role in bringing wrath upon the Egyptians. I want us to think together about God's command for us not to be with someone else's spouse. And to talk about this, I want to go back to our conversation with Rabbi Art Nemitov. Let's join that conversation once more. Well, let's talk about adultery. So the commandment seems pretty straightforward. What did it mean in the ancient world, or was it read any differently in the ancient world, or did it apply differently in the ancient world? And why is this commandment important for us today?
Well, adultery means that you do not take something that belongs to another person in terms of property. And in days gone by, women, sadly, were seen as pieces of property that were bought and sold, bought by the husband and sold by the father. Thank God today that's not the world that we live in. But as a result, when you commit adultery, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you. And I believe that's how it can be viewed today. That adultery is the most intimate of the marriage relationship, or the partner relationship is the most intimate of relationships. And when you violate that, you're violating that connectedness. So going back to that parallel, ours is do not worship another god, do not make idols for yourself. That equals adultery. When we say you shall not commit adultery, we're saying that the marriage relationship or the partner relationship is unique and special. So too do we believe that it parallels the idea of worshiping only one God. Our relationship is with one God. Our commitment is to one God. So too should our partner or marriage relationship be with one individual, not with more than one. And that's the connection between the two.
As human beings, we struggle with our sexuality. I mean, the reality is that not a single one of us, put in the wrong set of circumstances, couldn't find ourselves doing something that we would later regret. We have both a sin drive and a sex drive, and these two work together to lead us to think things we shouldn't think, to say things we shouldn't say, and sometimes to do things we shouldn't do. And this commandment is reminding us that we are called to monitor our minds and our hearts. And what Jesus teaches us once more, he turns it on its head or makes it even harder. He says it's not just about what you do, it's about what you think. And so we have to train our minds. We have to ask for his help to train our minds to be able to focus on what's right and good and to bless and not to harm other people, not to do things that are putting us at the center of the world and taking what doesn't really belong to us or giving ourselves to someone when we really belong to someone else. So I want to encourage you to, as you think about this, in our hypersexualized society, it's really hard to follow this commandment. And not just the way Moses had said it. I think, you know, I've never violated this commandment when it came to being with another woman besides my wife. But the thoughts that come into our minds, that's just a part of life in the world we live in. We're surrounded by this. And so what I want to remind you of is we're called to have holy thoughts. We're called to live our lives and to have our hearts and our minds focused on the right and not the wrong, to be faithful even in the inner thought life. But I also want to remind you of this, that when a woman was brought to Jesus, who was caught in the very act of adultery, as I mentioned in the book, and the righteous men, the Pharisees, the keepers of the law, came and they brought their stones to stone her because the law commanded that if you were caught in the act of adultery, you were to be stoned to death. You remember they brought her to Jesus. Where was the man? They didn't pay attention to whatever happened to the man. They brought the woman to Jesus, and they threw her at Jesus' feet. And I love this in John chapter 8, this story that circulated as an independent fragment for a very long time before it was inserted into the Gospel of John. They came to Jesus and they said, Jesus, what do you think? She was caught in the act of adultery, and they were trying to set up a trap for him where he would disobey the law by setting her free because they knew she was merciful to people who had violated the commandments. And they have their stones in their hands, ready to stone her to death. I picture her weeping and shaking in fear, not even looking up. And you remember Jesus kneels down and he begins to write on the dirt. And then he looks up at them and he says this, the one of you who has never sinned, you cast the first stone. And one by one, they all dropped their stones and walked away. And then he turned to the woman and he lifted her up and he said, woman, where are your accusers? Neither do I condemn thee, but go and sin no more. I want you to hear this, that every one of these commandments calls us to a high moral standard. But along with that is how Jesus actually practiced ministry, which was to be rich in mercy. And so if you've blown it in this area, I invite you simply to call upon Christ and invite him to show you mercy, to wash you clean and to make you new. And I invite all of us to say, Lord, please help me in my secret thought life and in my actions to honor you. Would you pray with me? Lord, how grateful we are that you are rich in mercy and abounding in steadfast love. How grateful also that you call us to such high standards, that you ask us to be able to focus our minds and our hearts in the right place, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And that means not to take advantage of someone who is not our spouse, to be faithful to our spouse. And, oh Lord, to be careful what we put into our hearts and our minds. You know how we struggle, oh God, in this hypersexualized world we live in. Please help us to be faithful to one another, to be faithful to you. And when we have failed in any part of our lives, we ask for you to forgive us, to wash us clean, and make us new. In your holy name, amen.
Right. So that's what we're looking at. You said that, okay. Bam. Next page, Roger. Okay, so let's go. No, don't want that.
So we had a transgender film.
Yeah, that's right. But no, it wasn't. It was no, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say they were transgender. It was, I wouldn't use that. Not in the sense that we talk that like transgender is described or talked about today. I mean, transgender are people that believe they are in the wrong, they're in the wrong body. And that person was just doing, that was a political ploy.
That's right.
And there's a difference there. So in that, but they set it up that way, like it was, this person was transformed into a man and yeah. That's, yeah,
I don't know if you saw, but there was a terrible piece of theology on a Catholic church in New York. The sign says, God is transgender.
but I've read that multiple times in other things. Yeah, no, I don't mean that, no. I mean, it's non-gender, it's just no gender.
There is no gender.
There's no
That's
gender, right? And that's not what transgender means either,
That's
right? That's right. Now, that is horrible theology. So look, as you learned about this, it was one of the first, and I heard somebody say like, Daniel, until I'd seen and read this, I didn't know there was any female pharaohs. I would have thought that would have been no. Yeah, but evidently there was a few. But as we talked about that, what do you learn about the value of women in the ancient world? There wasn't any. Well, they were valued. It was, but it was based on cash, right? Yeah, but she's way down the road.
From that time.
I'd say that was, yes, that's way down the road.
I think she appointed herself Pharaoh.
Well, she had an army behind her,
Yeah,
and she was family.
right,
You know what I'm saying?
right.
And it had to arm. But but also with that, that's an important thing. Like that's maybe that's 13, that's maybe 12 or 1300 years after this very year. Yeah. And so, and that's now we're talking about how Hellenism is sweeping the world and doing all that, and how I guess you would say like how people are viewing how we live together, how we should live, our relationships, roles, and it was different from even a little bit different from what they had here. Now, go next this piece in that video. How does Rabbi Nemitov say that this commandment connects with the second commandment? Have no other gods before me. And keep in mind that this was one of the things that the prophets always said, that you would go and chase it, that Israel was committing adultery. We're going after these other gods and doing those things. Okay?
So is that called spiritual adultery?
And I wouldn't call it that. I would call it like it's a violation of the second commandment. You know what I mean? We're going now, I just think it's adultery. I don't think it's spiritual. I think we just call it what it is. Because I think that's what Jesus changed it to. He said, I remember Jimmy Carter, we're ahead of ourselves right now. Do you remember when Jimmy Carter got blasted for saying that when he did his Playboy interview?
Yes.
And he said, oh, I've never, but I have had lust in my heart. And he got blistered for saying that. And he said, I ask forgiveness and that kind of stuff. He was just being honest, you know? He told the truth. And he said, but he got blistered for that stuff, right? So I think that, but when Jesus says, hey, if you look at a woman, you've committed it. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. There's something I want to read out of here that he doesn't flesh out in the PowerPoint, but I thought was important for us because there's a comment about it. But that, the mind, it's not a, because it's, well, we'll wait till we get there when we get to this. Now, so let's go. But it is a violation of, it is a spiritual violation, I guess, Fran, in the sense of that it goes against the Holy Spirit. It's what we've been taught and what we know is right. Okay, but it is just flat out. I think Jesus doesn't mention, because he's harder on this than what Moses and them are. I mean, he says, when you say, like, if you're thinking about it, okay, then that's adultery too. So it's, and there's more, and that goes more than just that's more than just adultery, right? That goes back to that first question when I asked, like, have you ever had a small sin that you thought that you had to avoid because it could lead to a bigger thing? It was that first part there. What are you going to say, Bob?
I had two comments. One of them is both the second commandment and the seventh deal with violation of a contract. The contract between God and Israel, and his promise to make them his promises, his chosen people,
Right.
that they follow.
Right.
So they go to another God, that's a violation of that contract. Marriage is a contract, it's an agreement.
Right.
And so adultery in marriage is a violation of a contract.
And one of the things though that if you go into the book, Neil, you got the book, right?
Yeah.
You remember what he said about like when he was talking about how we're going to get into this next part when we look at Genesis. But the part about like how it really just applied to if it was a married woman. That it wasn't necessarily adultery if it was an unmarried woman.
Yeah.
And that's in the Bible. That's not me making that up. That's not it's making.
This is what,
This is in Leviticus and Numbers. Yeah.
but my source, my comment.
Right.
Says that the commandment, the seventh, applies to the period of betrothal.
It's when they had to remember it was just I think you got to read his section because I'm like, oh, and it opens it up like in that time. I'm talking about the time that it was written when they're going through this. It was about protecting your property. Your property was your wife.
And he said, don't take something that doesn't belong to you.
Don't take something that doesn't belong to you. So and I think that's when he connected it to coveting, right? I think in my mind, he connected it to thou shalt not covet, talked about desires and stuff, which we'll talk about. So anyway, let's move through. Jesus, did you all have any comments? Carolyn or Mitzi?
No,
Okay. Jesus points out that this commandment is not just about what we do, what we think. Fran's comment, what are some ways that we can train our minds to be holy? I think this is important. That was in his prayer, right? And what he said. Studying scripture, praying, having accountability, things like that. Fill your minds with the good stuff, the things and the ways that we should be going on that. All right. So I thought, and this goes to that discussion of the patriarchal society, but if a man got caught with a married woman, they were both stoned to death. That was the thing. But if it wasn't a married woman, or then it wasn't this. So let's look. They had concubines. They could have side women. I mean, it wasn't like we think of marriage today. It's not the same thing.
That's what they were multiple wives.
Do what? And they had multiple wives. Yeah. Hey, how about poor
Abraham had,
he had Sarah, but then he took on like was it Bilhah? And Hagar and all this stuff. Yeah, it was a big deal. But then who had Rachel and Leah? Who had to work and work and work and work, and he got the wrong one, the one he didn't want the first time. And then he got, yeah, so they had multiple wives, which that's another discussion to talk about. Where did he go to get their wife? To their uncle. To get their uncle's daughters. Man, they'd be in jail.
the whole business of marriage is impacted by the environment where these people live.
Yeah.
Well, we lived in a country where there was bigamy at one part of the country,
Right.
and the other part, one woman would have several husbands.
Oh.
That would be up in the Himalayas where they needed to take the sheep down, and they needed more men. The wife would stay behind, and her husbands would go down, and one would stay with her.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go, Cindy.
And then different parts of the country be reversed.
That's what, you can do better, I can tell you. All right. So,
No, she doesn't. She's got you for how many?
no, I'm just saying, it's a joke, Pat, it's a joke.
Oh.
All right, who did the rule against adultery typically protect was men. But let's read 127 and 28. I think I got it on this next slide. Okay. So God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and master it. Take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and everything crawling on the ground. Did I need to go back? I don't remember. Yes. So what was God's design for the relationship between husband and wife?
That was
Partners, like partners, yes. Yep, co-equal. There was no dominion over this person, okay? That's there. And so, but like, and I really like what he says later. I'm gonna read this to you in a second. When it talks about when they were cast out of the Eden, what did sin do to that relationship? And he has a really good point here. On the wrong way, sorry. To the woman he said, I will make your pregnancy very painful. In pain you will bear children. You will desire your husband, but he will rule over you. Now, I thought, because how do you get around, how do you get past this thing? Because people use this all day long to talk about the relationship between husbands and wives and make it one that it's not supposed to be. And what he says in the book he said it was what? It was descriptive, not prescriptive. It wasn't like God was not pronouncing saying, this is the way I'm going to make it from now on. But he's saying, because we are no longer in need, because of what sin has done in a broken and fallen world, this is what it's going to turn out to be. That ruling over stuff is a result of sin, not because of God's wishes for relationship in the marriage. Okay, when he said that, I thought that's the way you talk about it. It's not. This is God saying this is what's going to happen now. Not because I'm not doing this to you, but because this is how we get this. This is an explanation for why pregnancy is so painful and giving birth is so tough. This is the way they would figure stuff out and describe why. They ask questions. Why is this like this? The kids ask, well, why is this like this? Why is the sky blue? Why is this whatever? And so why is that? Why is the sun? Why does the earth? The sun move across the sky? The sun doesn't move across the sky, but that's what they would say, because the guy's pulling his chariot across the sky with the sun. That's the kind of stuff they did. They had to figure it out. But here it's this that relationship is because of sin. That kind of stuff happens in our world. The perfect relationship of Eden, that co-equal partnership is broken as well. I thought it makes me sad. It really does. It makes me truly sad when I think about it that way. Yeah.
Because you think about God made us originally, so he could walk among us in the same garden, like it was a relationship.
Right.
To go across, and when that got screwed up.
And understand we're mixing creation stories here, right? But the thing is that but like Neil said, and even that relationship, that kind of intimacy that they had with God it's broken, and so it's not going to be the same. And so once it's out, and it's happening on that. Is it on this next slide? Yes. Here's what he says, and this is what he talks about it. Yeah, it was this. I believe that patriarchy and the subordination of women in human society were never God's will. Genesis 3:16 was not prescriptive, rather the verse was descriptive. It was announcing how things would be in a broken world outside of Eden. It's how relationships would be distorted by sin and the difference in physical strength generally seen between the genders. This patriarchy was seen as normative across the ancient world, but it was not God's original or intended will. I think that's so then the question is, have you ever considered that kind of an interpretation of that before? What do you think about that interpretation of looking at the casting out and how patriarchy becomes to exist? It's almost a might makes right, or the ones that are more powerful, especially physically, and that's who's going to win out, that kind of thing. And again, that makes me sad. All right. He talked about David. Do you remember talking about David in there and David's actions with Bathsheba? Well, no, let's talk about that first. Let's go back. So what do you remember about David's story with Bathsheba? What do you remember? He was doing what?
He was working.
David and Bathsheba.
There was a people
It was you know something bad's gonna happen to this because he said it was a time, when kings should be out at war, but what was he doing? He was hanging back at the house. And so, he spies. The other thing I saw we were reading about, and you don't think about this often, we think about, but Bathsheba was probably a teenager and he was probably in his 50s. Okay? And it's parts of the story we get, the part that stands out to me in the story that I remember most clearly is Nathan confronting David. Okay? With what all he'd done when he came to do it. But there are more, I think there are more, not disgusting, more terrifying parts of the story. Because he sent his messengers to inquire, to find out who she was and stuff, and they did what? They took her. And then he had his way with her. That's rape. He raped her. And then he killed her husband to cover it, because what? She says she's missed her period. You sent that message about a month or so later, said she missed her period, and now he's got to cover it up. That little thought became that horrible plot. Yeah, it's just, so going back to this next section here. So let's read it out real quick. Let's read James. If you would read it, somebody read it from their Bible. I know I have it up here, but I don't want to leave the page. 1:13 of 15. James 1:13, 15.
I cannot.
You can't read that, Sue? I mean, okay. Go ahead.
Neil's got it.
Let no one say that he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself is tempted anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. When sin is accomplished, it brings forth death.
Right. So how does that relate directly to, well, what does that passage say about the dangers of our desires? Now, I'm going back to what Rabbi Nemitov talked about it. When he didn't just say, he said adultery is in essence like a coveting thing. It speaks to our desires. Okay. But now what we in James isn't just about sexual sins of adultery or something like that. That's not what it's just about. It's about inappropriate use of our desires or placing them in other places on that. So how would that relate? What it says there, let no one say that God has tempted them. How does this relate directly to God, to David's actions? You see, I mean, go through the story, think about it. Yeah.
Because I mean, his desire led him to commit rape and do those things, take his eyes off of God, and then the sins just
Snowballed. The small sin becomes that larger sin. Sins, plural. Okay. And so now this is the part I wanted to read to you about the maybe. I thought this, Walter Wanegren is a good writer. And this was a quote that he used by him. Where are you at? Okay. Not it. You just read the fines. Should have marked it. Here you go. Author and pastor Walter Wangerin once wrote about the moment of maybe, the split second in which we may be seized by the thought of having an intimate relationship with someone who is not our spouse. When the thought crosses our mind, we either immediately shut the door, recognizing an affair is wrong, is prohibited by God, and will result in pain, or we entertain the idea. We cultivate it. We imagine what it might be like. At this point, we might not have any intention of actually cheating on our mate or violating someone else's marriage vows. Perhaps that's how David felt as he watched Bathsheba on the roof that night. The problem, Wangerin notes, is that when we begin to play with maybe, and it could be a short walk to yes.
Short walk to what?
A short walk to yes. Maybe might go to yes on that. So we're thinking about that. How can allowing a maybe open the door to further sin.
Because, you know, because you think about it more.
Start to figure out, you rationalize maybe, you try to figure out ways to make it happen and, yeah,
Yeah, it opens the door to more.
and it
Then you
opens
tell
it.
one lie to cover up another lie, another lie to cover
Yeah.
up another lie.
But
I'm in the wrong place. No, I'm not. Yeah, we got that. So. Yes, let's go here.
Hey,
Oh.
Roger,
Yes,
there's a verse somewhere in the Bible. I can't quote the chapter and verse, but it says if you look upon a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery in your heart.
that's the Matthew verse we're gonna look at here in a second. Or do we already look at that? Did we back it up yet? Not yet. We're gonna look at it here in just a second. That is, yes, that's it. That's what we're talking about, the mind thing. It's right. Jesus takes it and makes it a harder than even what, the simple commandment. He expands it. He did the same thing with murder, right? And said, if you're angry, okay, you're committing murder. It's what he does. He makes it tough.
Statement today that said lust, not sex, is the threshold of adultery.
Say that again.
Lust, not sex, is a threshold for adultery.
And I swear in that video, he said something like very close to what you just said in there. Right? Sin and sex are not the same thing. Exactly. That's a good quote. Yes. Hold on a second. Now we did this. God is tempting me. Yes. Hey, here's your verse, Carolyn. You have heard it was said, don't commit adultery, but I say that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. And when we do that, we should say he's quoted in a patriarchal society, right? They wouldn't think of women as being he's another thing too, like women aren't seen as, except for that one in John, right? Aren't really seen as the person who would think things like that or would do things like that. So, then we should want to read though. I want to can somebody go to 20, like past 28 and read those verses? Yep, no, in Matthew. So,
Matthew 28.
yep. Matthew
Say
20,
anyone who even looks at a woman with lust in his eye has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
keep going.
So if your eye, even it is your best eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. Better for part of you to be destroyed than for all of you to be cast into hell. And if your hand, even your right hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Better than find yourself in hell.
Yeah. So how does Jesus say we should even handle the slightest bit of temptation? I mean, does he want you to cut off your hand or poke out your eye or anything like that? Is that what he means? That's hyperbole. You know what I'm saying? That's prophetic hyperbole to make a point.
He wants you to take it seriously.
He wants you to take it seriously.
And to say no,
Say no. We should just have that, just say no.
just say.
That it doesn't mean that the maybe's not going to be there, right? And it doesn't matter what it is. It's not just, this is about temptation, is what he's talking about, right? He's not just thinking about adultery here. He's talking about temptation to transgress the way that God has given us to live, to go against that grain. That we want to, whatever we got to do to make it happen. And he does a good job of putting the little things out, maybe some points for us to think about how we could help ourselves there. But that end it. Don't let it fester. Right? Don't let it fester. I love that wandering thing about when you play with maybe, it's just a short walk to yes. That is, you know what I mean? That's a seriously good comment on that. But Jesus, and again, Jesus doesn't make things easier. Jesus makes things harder in how he puts it to us, right? Anger is murder, lust is adultery. Yeah, it's how he does it. You know, and now look at if you can't, Jesus set impossible standards in his teachings and ministry. The word is impossible. I mean, you
It makes us
can't-
More aware,
Say again?
it makes us more aware.
Right. Well, and what kinds of things would it, and then he talked about what? The woman caught in adultery and how Jesus, look at how Jesus showed mercy. He said, I don't condemn you either. But yet he wants the standard is there. There's high expectations. We should have high expectations. But he doesn't have condemnation for that woman. I thought that was, that's more than a model. I mean, I don't think I'm like that at all. I don't think I'm that way. You know what I'm saying? I'm all about some condemnation, probably. But we'll read that. We're going to read that story in a second, just for ourselves again, as he remembers it. But the other thing was that I always think of this thing. You can't. You're going to sin, right? Would you agree with that statement? Would you say I am going to sin? I mean, is that a true statement or not? Yes.
Yeah, but how many people really would at that instant think, I'm breaking a commandment, I'm breaking, making sin? People, I don't know, people.
Well, I don't think that people, I don't know, I don't either but that's the awareness that Gene's talking about there too. You know, it's like, I think we go back to what was the statement? Well, how then do we think about, this is what I was taught, and it's probably never happened to me or anybody else that's ever played golf. And who else played golf in here? Okay, so as you get near the water, as you get near a water hazard, what do you start to tell yourself? Well, I say don't hit it in the water. Don't hit it in the water. And I was taught, like, one of our coaching things is say, like, you don't focus on the negative. You fill it with, instead of saying don't, you say do the thing you want to do. Okay. Like, focus on your follow through, you focus on your grip, you get your fundamentals down, you just hit it the way you want to throw it. I bet if Michael focused on when he was pitching, like not giving the ball enough part of that strike zone, I'll bet it was not as good as when it was with what's my location, like focusing on the location of the ball versus, you know, where it's not, doesn't need to go. He would have been a mess. So it's filling our minds with the right things and thinking about the things that please God, or, well, it's not even about pleasing God. It's about what makes for the abundant life that he wants us to have. What are those things? Coveting, yeah.
Well, and this is for me personally now that I'm older.
Right.
I find myself reading my Bible more and staying in the scripture. And, you know, I think, if you talk to Jesus and have a conversation with him while you're reading the scripture, then later on during the day, that makes you aware, you know,
Right.
something that you want to do wrong.
If you strength.
So maybe we get moments in the garden again. Right, when we're focused, maybe we get moments in the garden. Right, and we're in tune, and God's guiding us or walking. We're going hand in hand, however you want to think of it, that kind of thing. Bob, what are you thinking about? You look like you're grinding there for a second. I
I'm
didn't.
thinking of something else entirely.
Okay, what was it?
Well, I'm going back to the patriarchal society.
Oh, okay.
You want to hear it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. God created man, all of the creatures on the earth, in specific relationships. Have you ever heard of a female wolf leading a wolf pack? No.
No, I guess
It's a
not.
patriarchal society.
Oh, creation is set up to be patriarchal.
That's right, and God made it that way. We, men and women, are different.
Like the Mars Venus stuff.
Yeah, we are partners. but it is not an equal partnership in terms of, in my opinion, and
I understand.
I'm gonna get chopped to pieces.
No, you're not. No, hey, it's got, don't turn around. You got a row behind you too, man. But I think, may I try to paraphrase what I think you're trying to say?
The male should be the prime leader.
Oh, that wasn't what I was gonna say.
Now, I'm not sure.
No. What I was gonna say is like, there's roles that we play,
Look back.
right?
The biology of humanity.
Right?
Women tend to be less physically dominant than men.
Okay,
And it has always been that way. So that women, and especially since
Right.
women bore children, and they could not at those times protect themselves, they
No.
needed a protector. Women stayed home, men did the hunting.
got it.
That's the way, that's the way it was.
Well, let me ask this.
Uh-huh.
Are things different now then? Because of like technology things that we have that people can, that maybe that shifted?
I think things are becoming much different. Because the physical differences are important, as important now as they were.
Right,
So, I mean, you've got brilliant women. I've got a granddaughter that's brilliant.
right.
She beats me at Sudoku all the time. She gets it
Right.
done in no time.
And she doesn't,
She isn't running.
she doesn't erase
So-
anything.
What my point is that the physical situation now between men and women doesn't determine the relationship as much as it used to.
Okay,
And in fact, the woman might be the leader in this partnership now, whereas 1,000 years ago, she wouldn't have been.
okay,
The woman might be the leader because she's more intelligent, more technologically savvy, whatever.
right. And can fill different roles now than they used to be able to fill.
Yes,
Absolutely. Okay. Can be.
I
in
have a
position
thought
of
on
power.
that.
Do what?
I have a thought on that.
Go ahead.
Could it be that a marriage is a partnership of two parts that make up a whole that's needed to get through this life easier?
I think that's why he says like, I make you a helpmate. You know, he
Well-
was called a helpmate. I think that's a good point.
I think they fit together like puzzle pieces.
Here we go.
One is the strength that the other one doesn't have.
Right,
You know, it takes them both. Because men, they're more warrior-like,
Some
and
are-
women are
yeah.
more emotional. You know, and it takes both, but neither to an extreme.
That's a good word.
You know, I mean, a lot of other civilizations think that too. You know, the yin and
Right.
yang and all that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Good
Well,
thought.
that's it. Okay.
Good thoughts. Anything else? Anybody? Man, we got on, how do we get to that, Bob? I asked you a question, didn't I? Man, that for me. No, but so going back to like, but in terms of patriarchal stuff though, I mean, I think it would be hard that I think there are still strands of us that think that women are property or treated like property, that they are to be subservient to men and their families and all that and do their bidding and things like that. I think those are fewer and fewer, but I see them voicing themselves more and more, if that makes any sense. They're a loud voice. And you see it in strands of the church. You can look at what that does for women's roles and things in the church. Like women should not be pastors and how they misuse scriptures to even use that point and point that out. So there are, but why does this happen? I really go back to his thing. This is because of sin. Okay, it's not the way it's supposed to be. You know, it wasn't supposed to be that one sex rule over the other sex. It's not that in there. Now let's read the story in John 8. 1 through 11. I mean, yeah, who's got a good version out there? And I think this is important for us tonight because, you know, I'd say that for myself, I know that there have been maybes that I turned into yeses, or allowed to become yeses, right? It's just how it goes. And I don't think you can escape it, because if you did, then you would lead a sinless life, and nobody leads a sinless life. Okay? Yeah,
Where are you going with the being born in sin?
being born in sin.
You mentioned that. Do you feel like you were born? in
No, I'm saying, no, I'm gonna say we've all sinned. That's what I'm talking about. Paul's saying, we've all sinned in that way. That's all I mean. I don't mean we're born in sin, like original sin or anything like that.
Okay.
No, but it doesn't matter whether it's original or not, we're going to do it. Right? Even when we don't mean to. Someone who's got 8, 1 through 11. Got it? Go ahead. Will you read it?
Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and talked with them. As he was speaking, the Jewish leaders and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery and placed her out in front of this staring crowd. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Moses' law says to kill her. What about it? They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him, but Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, all right, hurl the stones at her until she dies, but only he who never sinned may throw the first. Then he stooped down again and wrote more in the dust, and the Jewish leaders slipped away one by one, beginning with the eldest, until only Jesus was left in front of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to her, who are your accusers? Did even one of them condemn you? No, sir, she said. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more.
Right on. So let me find this next thing. So how do you think that those words sounded to the woman? I wonder if she believed it. When he said, go and say, I don't condemn you, go and sin no more. Like if she believed it, like she couldn't believe that she was being let out for this thing, this wasn't going to happen to her. I thought about that. So I was like, what do you think her reaction was?
If you think, I mean, if we all put our men and women, if we put ourselves in that position, whether we were man or woman, and we were going to be stoned to death, and somebody comes and says, who's accusing you? Go and sin no more. I mean, wouldn't that be a profound change in your life?
You would, I would hope.
I mean, you would hope, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I would hope.
I mean, because that would be life and death. I mean.
Yeah, it'd be getting close.
You're given life again.
Right. And it would be having your sentence commuted from capital to
Right,
life in prison,
right.
something like that. But, and it doesn't, and we don't get to hear like what her thoughts were about, because she got caught. Right, since she was
But
caught.
maybe she's not the one at fault. It may be all the men that
Yeah.
are standing on the sideline.
If somebody, because there's the other thing is that, we don't know what it was. I mean, the dude may have, you just don't know. They don't know. But the
Well,
point is what Jesus' reaction
The
is.
Pharisees, they were trying to,
Trap him.
they was trying to trap Jesus.
Yeah.
So they were looking for any situation at all to throw at him.
And so even here on one of the top 10 sins, Jesus shows mercy. And so what does that tell us about his mercy towards us when we sin? Right? Yeah. There's a trust there. So in this, I wish
Go and sin no more.
go and sin no more. But there was hey Neil, you read this. There was a section about what he told the guy who had an affair. And what he told him about getting that, it was back here. I gotta find it. I thought it was great. I thought it was an incredibly compassionate thing he said. He goes, I think also of a man in his early 40s at the time who confessed his affair to me. It started as a flirtatious relationship at the office. Okay, then he pledged they would never do good and lure was too great. When the affair was found out, well, that's not the one. It's the wrong one. I should have marked it. It's my fault. But what he said was this, he said, you know, the guy said he could never get over what he'd done. He'd done something. It wasn't a affair, but it was something similar or whatever. He said he just felt terrible and whatever could go over. He said, yeah, but do you think that, you know, he said, what about all that? You got to also think about all the times when you didn't. You know, it's not just about what you did. It's about also when you didn't. Think about those. And that's kind of a solution-focused, strength-based approach like counselors might do. Then what did you summon from yourself to keep yourself on that time? Okay, how did you do it that time? Did you stay with your path? And so when we get into this now we're talking about how do we resist? So how did you do it the last time? When you were faced with something similar, when you were faced with that small thing, when you were faced with a maybe, then how did you keep it from becoming something else, growing larger or becoming a path to yes or something? 5 R's for resisting temptation. 1, reflect on these. Remember who you are. 2, recognize the consequence of the action. And I use that for all day long. Like thinking about like be angry, but do not sin or something like that. I use it a lot. Rededicate yourself to God. I also do that. Reveal your struggle to a trusted friend. I've not had accountability of partners. I've never done that. Remove yourself from the tempting situation. Absolutely. That's key. That's big stuff right there. So these are, and you may take all 5 for some things.
Really good, really good.
Yeah. And so the question, does any resonate with you? These R's resonate? Does they? Yeah. Then this is the question, and I ask myself this. Are there any maybes in your life that might be leading you down a dangerous path? Are there anything that, or maybe something that you haven't thought of as a maybe? I wonder, and it's beyond the odd things of adultery or lust or whatever. But you know, the rabbi hit it. I mean, it's about our desires and our desires being for the right things. So how do we allow ourselves? How do we get ourselves into a position where our mind is more full of the good things that God wants us to do than it is the things that would lead us off the path? That's the stuff that's what this chapter has done for me more than anything.
Well, and you think about it, I mean, it's not only like a relationship between a man and a woman, it's lust for whatever. I mean, if you covet power or you covet what your neighbor has or you
Right.
think they have.
Yeah, where they think they have.
Right,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Well-
What's the old saying, you want to be like the Joneses, but
Right. Yeah.
who are the Joneses? Yeah.
Right. Well,
I was always told what you put in is what's gonna come out, so be mindful of who you're hanging out with, especially with the things you guys.
So-
What you're doing to help foster a better relationship or be, to be more pure, clean, whatever you want to call it. Versus putting yourself in situations where it's not a good thing.
and I would say for me, like when you saying that, I think foundational stuff for that is remember who you are and remove yourself from those things.
What if you're less than?
Don't give the, huh?
What if I'm less than that with a man that in the office that I work with? Is it gonna be easy for me to remove myself from that temptation? Quit
No.
the job or what?
But then that's where you might go in and say, you recognize the consequence of the action and you rededicate yourself, talk about it with somebody. Don't let it be a secret thing in your mind. Talk about it honestly with one of your best friend or whatever. Those are things. And remember who you are. You know what? That thought may enter your mind, but that's not who you are. It's not what you do. Had this very same conversation a week ago with the guy at work. One of the custodians, man. He asked him, he's an older guy, probably maybe a little older than me or whatever, but he's been cheating on his wife.
You been what?
He's been cheating on his wife.
Oh.
So and he was like, and so Cliff was there that day and he comes in and says, what about you? He said, He said, you're not a bad looking guy. What makes you different? Because he asked me, what would you do? I said, well, I wouldn't do it. I said, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. It's not something I should do to my wife. He said, it's not good for me. It's not good for her. It's not what you think it is. It's wrong. I said, it's wrong. From in my book, it's wrong. He said, you wouldn't. I said, no, I don't. I don't even go there. And I said, and that's the thing. I said, I don't go there because I know what it will do. And I don't want that. And and he's like, huh, okay. And then my buddy, my coworker said, he said, what's wrong with that? And the guy said, okay, he just said he won't. He said, I just can't believe that, man. Any guy, man, bloody guy, whatever he do. I say, okay, that's how he thinks.
It could end up hurting your children too.
Well, you're the consequences.
Yes.
Consequences. That's just one, but that's just one part of it. And listen, I think the consequences are always bigger than we even imagine that they are.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that do.
It's a separator, right? And you know, there's that, what's the line? I have sinned against you, God, and you alone. That's just, I don't believe that line. When we say that,
I used to tell.
it's against everybody. You sin against me.
Kids when they were growing up. That you have choices in life. And each choice you make has consequences.
Right.
And you have to think of the big picture. Because I used to be the mom that would take all the girls shopping,
Mhm.
you know, Renee and her little
Yeah.
group and stuff. And they'd be giggling about, oh, look at this boy, look at that one. I said, you can appreciate the scenery, but don't go near it.
Right. Oh, well. Good luck. Yes. Hey, any final thoughts on tonight? Anything that has come to you in a different way, or thinking about something that this is a larger commandment than maybe what it just says in the words, do not commit adultery?
Here's another statement that I saw today. It says,
Yeah.
everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other.
Amen.
Amen, correct.
True statements. All right. How about you all? Not any last words, but any last words for this evening?
Yeah, call me. I gotta talk again.
Got you. All right. Carolyn? You doing all right?
I'm doing fine. I'm
Em,
afraid
okay?
I'm afraid I'm gonna open up a can of worms.
Oh, if you well, we were out of time. You want to save it till the beginning of next week?
Well, no, I'll go ahead and just mention it because it's kind of been on my mind out throughout this. I mean,
Right?
they had challenges in biblical days with adultery, but look at what we face today. There's pornography and there's.
Oh, that was a big
Hollywood.
part of the book. And I just followed the script here on this. That was a big part of his writing, and that, you know, what does it mean in the age of pornography? That was a big part of this. It is. And think about TV now, right?
Right?
I was shocked. I like to watch the Yellowstone stuff. It's too violent. I stopped it because it just got stupid violence on it. But I was watching the one 1923, and it's full nudity. I'm like, this is a television show. It's not a R-rated movie. It's not supposed to be this way. You know, and it doesn't have to, and it doesn't add anything to the story. I'm like, it's just and now it's commonplace, right?
Right.
It's commonplace. It's on TV. It's not on Cobra Kai though, baby. You can watch Cobra Kai and not have to worry about it. Yeah, but you're right, Carolyn. I don't think it's more complicated. I just think there's more opportunities.
I gotta go take a telephone call.
All right.
I'll talk to y'all later.
All right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's just, it's not more complicated. It's more opportunities.
Oh, gosh. yeah.
Right. Hey, I really appreciate the boundaries training that we do in our ministry stuff. It's part of being licensed and stuff like that. Like the things that we go, the trainings and things that we do, whether it's about pornography, how to like to manage like counseling and things like that when they're opposite sex and stuff like that and different things. How to look at yourself to examine and stuff. That's good stuff. Every medical professional should have to do that kind of stuff too, I think. Absolutely.
What's the saying? That there is, it has to do with the sins of the fathers are visited so many generations down.
Right?
What, I can't remember it.
He said,
Huh?
yes, that's what it is. That's the essence of it. It just keeps
Seven
going.
generations.
7 generations.
I think we see that today.
Hmm.
I think we see that in American
It's
society.
compounded.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you see the broken family. And what it does to kids down the line and grandkids and so on, all the way down.
I see it every day.
Before it runs its course and you get back on. the
Right.
wall.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes
Okay.
a lot of sense, really.
All right, so. Pat, would you close with prayer?
I was beginning to. Blessed Savior, this has been such an opportunity to be in this house and discuss your word. How do we live our lives, Lord? I think this is how our hearts beat. And we don't take time to reconsider what a lot of bad traffic we can get into. Lord, guide us, give us protection, and don't ever stop loving us. Amen.
Amen. All right,
Mother, dear,
I did. Her mother did really well. It went great. She's home and resting, and it went wonderful.
what did she-
Doctor's
What
report.
she have done?
Something in her heart.
Like catheterization?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I never remember the procedure. I just know they've been waiting for this surgery for a long time.
Hmm.
Yes, and I'm gonna go check on Glenda here in just a second.
My sister.
All right, I'll holler at you on the way across.
Today.
Let me do this. What?
My sister.
All right, I'll talk to you then.
Yes. Boom. In for all.